Guys, if your Christmas plans included going to see the release of The Interview starring Seth Rogen and James Franco, you'll have to look elsewhere. Cinemark Here 16 in Gulfport has officially decided to remove it from its listings. At the Biloxi Parade, spectators say it's worth it to be out here in the rain to uphold their Mardi Gras traditions and spend time with their family. Today, the port commended tenants like KLLM and Crowley for their efforts in sustainability, but now the port will take on its own projects like installing LED lights throughout the port. In the state of Mississippi, when drivers get their license, they automatically give implied consent to breath or blood tests. This B-17 is special because it is the most authentically outfitted of all the remaining B-17s. That means everything from the guns to the radios are pieces of equipment that were actually used during World War II. STEM fields may not always seem interesting in textbooks, but when students learn with hands-on activities, it sure captures their attention.
But the storm she rode in with a vengeance and a mission.
Past Christian resident Laura Bain remembers the vengeance of the storm that took both her parents and two brothers 9 years ago today. She called her mother that morning. When she drove over just hours later, Bain found the unimaginable.
The window was busted open, and they still had the blinds hanging up on the window, and so I moved the blinds over, and all I could see was my dad's face. I guess from the water, how it went down, the way he landed was like he was staring out the back window.
Inside the home, she found the bodies of her parents and brothers caked in mud. Now with a family of her own, Bain visits Katrina memorial events every year.
It helps a lot, and it feels good to know that there's so many supporters here, and so many people that's there for you.
And for those who lost loved ones in Hurricane Katrina, events like today are not only an opportunity to grieve, but also to remember their family's legacy in Hancock County.
We have to remember because we only learn from history. We can surmise what may happen in the future, but it's only history that tells us what we did right and what we did wrong.
Bill Brown was chief operations for MEMA when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. He says emergency agencies are now more prepared than ever, but many people still hold the devastation of Katrina heavy in their hearts.
She wanted people's homes.
Memorial events like those today help the survivors honor those they lost and give them the strength to move on. In Waveland, Alyssa Meisner, News 25. Legislators first thought that they might be able to go home today, but after the governor called a special session and debate continues on the funding for public transportation, it looks like they'll be here until Friday. Now, with the session starting to wrap up today, I met with some coastal representatives who gave me the updates on the greatest bipartisan efforts of the year. Mississippi's 2014 legislative session was heated, but on key issues, legislators across the aisle were able to vote together. One of the biggest bipartisan efforts of the season was the 2014 budget.
And those come from different parts of the state who have different representation, different senators. So we had to really work bipartisanly across the aisle to make sure that, number one, we had a balanced budget. But number two, that the moves that we took and the budget that we presented was responsive to the needs of the people.
The budget was balanced and a rainy day fund was increased by 5% in case of a future disaster like Hurricane Katrina. The budget is just over $6 billion, an increase in response to greater revenue and growing financial demands of many governmental organizations. One of those organizations was Mississippi teachers, who will be receiving a pay raise under an education bill.
I was a teacher in my previous life, and it was probably the hardest job that I have ever done. And in order to get the best teachers and retain the best teachers, I think, it's a market-driven thing. We're going to have to pay them to get the best teachers. And we've got great teachers in Mississippi, and we need to compensate them for what we do.
Another crucial bill to be discussed in this building was the criminal reform bill. It focused on mandatory sentences for violent criminals and rehabilitation for nonviolent criminals who had been arrested for drug or property crimes.
It was Republicans and Democrats coming together in the Senate. When we passed it the first time, we only had a few no votes.
The criminal reform bill will ultimately save taxpayers money by hopefully having less nonviolent criminals behind bars. While the budget, teacher pay raises, and the criminal reform bill are just three of the many issues to be covered this session, their passage reassures the citizens of Mississippi that their legislators are working together to best protect and serve them. Now, one of the last bills to pass the House and be headed to the governor's office today is Katie's Law, which deals with DNA testing, making it easier to catch criminals. The debate still is continuing on the funding for public transportation, so they will reconvene for a session tomorrow and could even go into a special session if an agreement is not reached by Friday. Reporting live in Jackson, I'm Alyssa Meisner. Former Jackson County Deputy Louis Miller is not leaving quietly. After being fired this week from the results of an internal investigation of diesel oil on Singing River Island, Miller says there's more to the story. Last week, before the investigation was completed, Miller secretly recorded a conversation with Britt about the diesel oil.
I don't think there was a problem with the way that, if there was a problem with the way we discussed doing it, and it happened that way, then that's on me. You're right.
Here, Britt says there was not a problem with the way the oil was handled and that he knew reports weren't being filed on the oil.
The sheriff has known about the fact that there wasn't a report filed almost 2 months ago. But at that time, he wasn't critical of Louis Miller. He didn't terminate him. He didn't suspend him. He didn't, threaten to sanction him in some manner.
But Britt says the investigation found there was more than just unfiled paperwork.
There was other factors that we had to make sure that were covered. I mean, was we had an issue or a question? Was the fuel good? I mean, if the fuel was good, then we shouldn't have disposed of it. So those issues had to be looked into.
Britt says there were other policy violations besides Miller not filing paperwork that led to his termination. But Miller feels he is the scapegoat in the oil debacle where he was simply following orders the sheriff dictated.
He was involved in the process. He made the judgment calls. He takes responsibility.
Jackson County Board of Supervisor President Troy Ross says the Civil Service Commission is now looking into the sheriff's decision to terminate Miller to determine whether it was a fair decision or not.